the thing off, but I imagine in the early 30s, things kind of backed off to. I can remember when they really stopped at Gloucester Crossing.
Yes.
And they didn't.
Late 20s, I believe.
They didn't go any farther down.
Right.
Yeah.
But when they did run, they ran as far as Depot Square, and then they sidetracked down to Asbury Grove.
Oh yeah. So that was when when the whole thing got going. Yeah.
And incidentally, the building that we see here, straight on, which is now the L&G, or the former L&G package store, the Cornerstone package store, that was the A&P building.
Oh, is that right?
That was the A&P building, and we can just make out the logo here on the sign in front. So that's where they began, and of course they were later to move uptown.
That's right.
And then come back.
And right across the street.
Sure.
That's right.
Absolutely.
There's also on the extreme right on that same thing. It looks like there's a drugstore there. I wonder if that was Macaulay's first.
That is the Macaulay building, Harold, right there.
Yeah, I know it, but I mean, go across the street and you see a drugstore sign, and it looks like drugs.
No, I think he moved later on. I think the Macaulay business was moved later on over.
As I remember it, Macaulay was in the large building.
Yep.
But I still see
something was over there.
Something was over there, and it said drugs, and it had the modern pestle sign.
Yeah.
Okay, now there's a nice picture looking down the track here, the Gloucester Branch track, and your alma mater and mine, Harold, is in the background there.
And mine.
And yours.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
That's right, Rich.
Yep.
Old Beverly High School, which is down the Briscoe.
Yeah.
And the last picture that we have is a look back into Gloucester Crossing, and again we see the Macaulay building, and
that answers the sign question. You can see the drug sign that was on the corner, and it's stuck out in the street from Macaulay's on the corner.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, back to our journey here. We're up to item 7, and this is supposedly, it says here, Rich, President Taft's train in his car, which was called the Mayflower, dated 1909.
It may and it may not be. We're not really sure. This picture came to us along with several others, including the one that we just looked at of President Taft's train at Montserrat. This, unfortunately, is so vague that it could be most anything, but there's definitely some kind of a different car on the rear end here of this 3-car train. It is an extra because you can see the white flags flying on the locomotive. So it's either the President's train or it's an extra run for one of the millionaires that live down the branch, such as Henry Clay Frick or Judge Moore, or one of those
what was
social
the name
types.
You gave to those trains in an earlier program? The Dude trains?
The Dude, the North Shore Dude, the limited parlor car only trains, that just carried the well-to-do, and it was nonstop from Beverly into Boston.
Yeah. Any comments there, Harold? Or shall we?
I haven't heard of that Dude thing before.
That's Richard's.
That wasn't its real name. Its real name was the Flying Fisherman, but they called it the Dude.
Well, you mentioned something about how, to use your words, that the local gentry did not want to ride with the riffraff.
Oh, absolutely not. No, they paid big money to charter this special train, just in the summer only, thank you.
Harold, this is a last-minute addition to our show here tonight. Would you say a word about this one, 7A?
Well, this is kind of interesting. It depicts pretty much the memories that I have of the Beverly Station before it was changed over for an eating establishment. And this train coming in looks like somewhere around 1900-ish, 1910, because of the headlight on it. And the dress costume, I had to ask my wife. She says it's probably more around 1910. So
that'd be pretty accurate, I'm sure. And off to the right, we see Park Street, I believe, and some of the buildings along there that no longer stand.
Some of those are shoe factories.
Yes, definitely. They all have the same shoe factory look, probably built by the same builder.
Well, now we're up in North Beverly, Rich, in 1911. What do we have here?
We've got what looks to be probably a train that went as far as perhaps Portsmouth or Newburyport, not a through train, because by 1911, trains that went further than that had been given over to larger types of locomotives. And so we suspect this is probably a fairly local train. And it stopped right just beyond the station, which is out of sight at the right. And in the background, there's a board fence, and you can see some kind of a of a car parked in behind there, a freight car, and that's probably on the side track, which was in there on the far end of the North Beverly Station area for many years.
Harold, the engineers rode pretty much exposed to the weather, didn't they, back in those days?
It isn't as bad as the early days when they didn't even have a cab.
Yeah. But I see him sticking his head out the window here.
Yeah, that's the fireman.
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah, they have, they have windows in the front, and they have windows in the side, so they can doctor them any way they want.
Never having ridden up in one of those cabs, but to me that doesn't seem like the best view of the track that you might possibly have, but I suppose that was under the...
Well,
it isn't bad.
It isn't bad. You had the boiler, which stuck way out so that the engineer couldn't see anything to his left, and the fireman couldn't see anything to the right, and especially if you were going around a curve. Picture being in the locomotive, you're sitting on the right-hand side, as the engineer did, and you're on a long curve swinging around to the left. You can't see a thing that's coming toward you. You depend on your fireman to tell you what's over on that side. It was definitely a two-man job.
So there was a fella looking out both windows.
That's correct, and calling signals back and forth, which each acknowledged to the other when they repeated it.
Oh, I see. Okay. Next, we're at the Beverly car yard, I believe this is, Rich, in 1912. And Harold, we have some names here that you might like to read off to our viewers.
I can read some of them. I think it's missing on some.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, left to right, C. Dockham, he was the brakeman, and nicknamed Baldy Goodwin, another brakeman. Mike Birmingham was the conductor. Charles Fowler was the engineer. And I don't know what the last one is.
I do. That's Ben Flanders, and he was the fireman. And I had the pleasure of interviewing Benjamin Franklin Flanders at age 95 or something like that.
Wow.
And he was a resident of Hamilton. And he was one of the oldest of 3 surviving Boston and Maine enginemen in 1979 when I interviewed him on tape.
Wow.
And he passed away 3 months after that.
Isn't that something?
Quite a gentleman.
Isn't that something? Well, with a name like Baldy Goodwin, I suppose you had to wear a hat at all times, Harold, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Keep your head warm.
wigwam.
Yeah. It's interesting here. This is scrapped in 1912. It wasn't around all that long.
That's
apparently.
right. That was right at the end of its career.
A real old-timer, as we would say here. Okay. We come into the United Shoe Yard here. Pictures dated April 2, 1921. We have 2 which must have been taken within literally seconds of each other.
I was going to say, it looks like the same train.
Yeah, I would say so. Harold, why don't you comment on item 10 here, first picture? And
well, this is a view looking at the junction of Elliott Street and McKay. And if you'll notice in the background, the tidal water comes in, and it's now a parking lot. So this was filled in, and then they had the shoe ponds, which were probably started out tidal water and then ended up, regular unsalted stuff.
Yeah.
And the locomotive definitely is bringing the workers in the morning, because that's the side that the sun would shine on, and somebody come in with looks like a little old Model T there. And there's some guys that look like they're holding some round disc, and it was probably to stop, for people. This locomotive, when it was going, it would probably pull farther into the yard, and they had to stop people from walking and driving the car. Yeah. You recognize the building. It still looks pretty much the same. That's on the extreme right, and that little tank type thing right in the middle is, I understand, it was a transformer that got pretty warm, so they had a bucket where they kept water in it, and it helped water cool the transformer.
Rich, anything to add to this first one?
Not really, except that you can tell, certainly as of April 2nd, 1921, the date this was taken, that getting to the shoe by train was far more popular than getting there by automobile. There's virtually no place to park. You'll notice that, as Harold pointed out in the background, what is now part of the parking area was all tidewater, and in the foreground is still rock outcroppings. There was no parking lot as such. So the predominant way of getting in and out of the shoe for the workers at that time was by train. They actually had their own station platform.
And the train would come in from Point South, would it not?
That's right. It
Yeah.
would come in from the Federal Street area and take a siding and come down along where McPherson Drive is today, and then swing into where the Shoe Foundry building is on the other side of Elliott Street, and come out through where the fence there is, cross Elliott Street and into the parking lot.
Yeah. But again, the workers, a majority of them would live in that area.
Oh yeah, from Boston, Chelsea,
Lynn, that
sure.
area.
Mhm.
This also might be interesting to note that the locomotive is what they call a 10-wheeler, and when I was taking photographs in the United Shoe, they were usually American types. They were, much less power.
Yeah. Yeah. That outcropping of ledge looks like McKay Street. to
That
me.
is.
Yes.
That's exactly where that
McKay
is.
Street would be going along there today. And one other thing that strikes me here, look at the way these people are dressed.
Oh yeah.
They all have coats and
And
maybe-
probably
maybe
ties.
on.
Yeah.
going to work manual labor
in a
United Shoe.
factory.
Yep.
Sure.
Isn't
Well,
that
there was
something?
pride back in those days.
Isn't that something? Okay, next picture. We're back in the.
It looks like the locomotive had come in, and now the cars are unloading the passengers, and they're heading for the work. So I think it's the same day, same train.
Sure.
Probably.
Yep, minutes apart from each other.
Yeah.
Next photo, we're back in the yard again. Would this be the engineer, Rich? Or?
Yeah, probably maybe the fireman, because I see a man hanging out the right-hand side of the cab, so this might be the fireman. This is the afternoon train getting ready to take the workers home. You'll notice they're facing the opposite direction. The Shoe building's behind them, and they're facing outward. So they've backed in there sometime in the afternoon, and they're getting ready for the outbound flow of workers to take them home.
Yeah. Now, we've mentioned the term engineer, fireman, brakeman. Can we just take a minute and define each of these fellows in terms of what they do or what they did on the train?
The engineer was the boss of the engine.
Number one man.
And he actually was throttle, brake, and that. The fireman primarily took care of keeping the coal. Earlier it used to be wood, but most of the time here it's coal.
Keeping the oven stoked.
Yeah, keeping it stoked so that they can get up ahead of steam.
Uh-huh.
Most of these tea kettles probably ran from somewhere around 200 pounds per square inch steam.
I see. And there were a varied amount of them. Every picture, Rich, seems to have a different number on the car siding that we have in this collection here. So there were many, many engines.
Oh, sure. Each class of locomotives, for
Came
instance,
through.
might have been in the hundreds and had that many numbers, sure. And at first glance, they all look alike, but in reality, each was slightly different. There were
Sure.
no two exactly alike.
Okay, 1921 at the United Shoe.
Right, which
Now,
is a good companion to the two earlier pictures.
But
yeah.
I think 1911 did a lot of rearrangement of numbers.
That's right.
Yeah.
They were all renumbered.
Before that, anything could be anything.
Yep, they tried to standardize the numbering in 1911, and they renumbered everything within a 2-month period.
Wow. Okay, January 2, 1928, we're at Beverly Depot. Harold?
Well, this is an outbound train heading for North Beverly. It looks like a Pacific locomotive, so they got a few cars on it. And if it's in 28, I can remember some of the, like the large building at the left was the old Bond Hotel.
This is it right here. Yep.
And the building at the top of, was off of Park Street, and that was a leather factory.
Okay. And in those days, the Beverly Depot had a pavilion-type structure on both sides of
Yeah,
the
I think
track.
it showed good in the postcard.
Yes,
one.
it did.
Yeah.
Yep. That has since disappeared.
I know, I call them canopies, I suppose.
Yeah, canopy is a good word for that.
Yeah.
Any comments, Rich, before we move on here?
Yeah, the Bond Hotel. Every railroad station in any town of even modest size had at least one hotel within a spit of the railroad station. And these were railroad hotels, as far as I'm concerned, because all the salesmen would get off the train and had to have some place to stay with their big cases of samples and whatever they lugged around with them, drummers they used to call them. And so some of the largest cities had 2 or 3 of these hotels within an easy walk from the train depot. And in a lot of cases, if you look around where a station is or was, you'll find a building today which is either now apartments or some kind of a use like that, which was very obviously a railroad hotel. And there's at least 3 that I can think of right here in Beverly. This one, which still stands, the Park Hotel, which was the Park Place restaurant, and which is now some Italian restaurant.
Just up the street.
Just up the street. And then further up Railroad Avenue, there was the Hotel Central, which is now a big apartment building on the right side of Railroad Avenue, about at the top of the hill.
We'll have to get our trusty camera out and get a picture of those.
Railroad hotels.
Put them in here. Now, we're moving right along to the, well, we're at the depot still, and it's 1928, June 18. Harold, what do we have here?
Well, I feel that this is probably an era where they did, after 1911, where they did some redecoration of locomotives. This is relatively new locomotive at the time, probably being built in 1910-ish. And it's one of the 3600 Pacific class, and this is the Ot 5. And when they did this renumbering and redecoration, they